The god of war, Mars, was far more than just a destroyer of men. He was the defender of Rome, the patron of its soldiers, and the silent guardian of its fields. But who really was Mars? What were his true origins, and why is he still so important even today? Well, it's time to find out. Hello, my name is Author, and let's get into today's video about Mars. So let's start with a quick summary of who Mars actually is. In Roman mythology, Mars was the god of war, strategy, and courage. He was the son of Jupiter and Juno, brother of Minerva, and was usually depicted as a handsome young man armed with a spear and a shield. Now, if you know anything about Greek mythology, then you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't that Ares, the god of war? And you would be right. Yes. Mars was originally a very minor deity in Roman religion, overshadowed by the much more prominent Greek god Ares. However, over time, the Romans took this god and made him their own, and eventually Mars became one of the most important and revered deities in the Roman pantheon. But why? Let's go back to the beginning to find out how Mars came to be. According to Livy, the Roman historian, Mars was one of the oldest of the Italian gods, though we don't have many surviving sources from that early period of Roman history. We do know that the early Romans were an Italic tribe of people that lived near the Tiber River in the 7th century BC. They were a small and relatively unimportant group of people, but they had their own beliefs and traditions, which included a god of war named Mars. Now, the Romans didn't write down any myths or stories about him, so we don't know exactly how he was viewed or worshipped. But we do have some clues from other sources, such as the Greek writer Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who wrote about the 12 founders of Rome. According to Dionysius, the Romans believed that their city was founded by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, who were nursed to health by a she-wolf after being abandoned at birth. And guess who was the father of Romulus and Remus? That's right, Mars. Yeah, Mars was said to be the father of Romulus and Remus, and he played a key role in the founding of the city of Rome. And that's pretty significant because it means he was seen as the protector and defender of the city and its people. This belief was likely influenced by the fact that the Romans were a warlike people themselves, and they needed a god of war to protect them in battle. It's possible that this Mars was actually an older Italic deity who was associated with fertility and vegetation, but that he was gradually transformed into a more martial god as the Romans became more warlike. Now, the Romans also had a lot of contact with the Etruscans, who were an advanced civilization that lived in central Italy. And the Etruscans had their own beliefs and traditions, which may have also influenced the Romans' beliefs about Mars. You see, the Etruscans had a particular fascination with death and the afterlife, and it's possible that they saw Mars as a god who could help them win battles and also lead them into the underworld. There are a number of Etruscan tombs that are decorated with images of Mars, and this suggests that he was seen as a guide and protector for those who had died in battle. So it's possible that the Romans picked up this belief from the Etruscans. But what about Ares? How did the Romans take this Greek god of war and make him their own? See, the Romans didn't really accept the Greeks' explanations for how the world began. They had their own stories about the creation of the world and the origins of humanity, and they didn't really see a need to change these beliefs to fit the Greeks' beliefs. Instead, they kind of just kept them separate. The Romans saw Ares as a foreign god, and they didn't really have much use for a god of war who was associated with violence and bloodshed. I mean, yes, they were a warlike people themselves, but they didn't see war as something to be glorified or celebrated. They saw it as a necessary evil, something that had to be done to protect their state and their people. Ares, on the other hand, was all about the glory and excitement of war. He loved the sound of clashing arms and the sight of men dying in battle. And that just wasn't something that the Romans could really relate to. I mean, sure, they had their own myths and legends about great Roman heroes like Romulus, Aeneas, and Julius Caesar, but these stories didn't focus on violence and bloodshed. Instead, they emphasized the courage, cunning, and determination of these heroes. In contrast, Mars was everything the Romans wanted in a god of war. He was brave and strategic, but he was also disciplined and restrained. He wasn't about the glory or excitement of war. He was about protecting the state and defending the innocent. And that's why the Romans embraced Mars so wholeheartedly. And eventually, they began to see him as the true god of war, the one who had been with them since the founding of their city and had protected them through countless battles and conflicts. The Romans built many temples and shrines to Mars throughout their empire, but the most important was the Temple of Mars, the Avenger, or Mars Altor in Latin, located in the Campus Martius, or the Field of Mars. This was a large open space near the Tiber River that was used for military training and as a place for public gatherings. It was here that the Romans would go to pay homage to Mars and to ask for his protection in battle. Another important festival in Mars's honor was March or Martiis, which was celebrated in the month of March. This was a month that was already sacred to the Romans before they even adopted Mars as their god of war. But once they did, it made sense to hold a festival for Mars during this month. The festival lasted for 5 days and included processions, sacrifices, and prayers to Mars. It was a time when the Romans would also celebrate their victories in battle and give thanks to Mars for his help. There was also the festival of Equites, which was held in June and celebrated the Roman cavalry. This was a mounted unit of soldiers who were known for their skill and bravery in battle, and it was believed that Mars had a special connection to them. The soldiers would ride around the city in procession, dressed in their finest armor and carrying Mars's symbol, the spear. And finally, there was the festival of Armilustrium, which was held every 5 years and was a purification ritual for weapons. This was an important ceremony because it was believed that weapons could become contaminated with the blood and spirits of those who had died in battle, and this could have a negative effect on the soldiers who used them. During the festival, the weapons were taken out of their scabbards and allowed to rust in a nearby river. This was seen as a way of purifying them and making them ready for use once again. Now, Mars didn't just become popular during the Republic period, he also rose to prominence during the Roman Empire. Yeah, during this time, the Roman army was at its largest and most powerful, and Mars was seen as the god who gave them their strength and courage. He was especially revered by the emperors, many of whom claimed to be descended from Mars. And there are many statues and coins that show Mars alongside other Roman gods, such as Minerva and Victoria, the goddess of victory. However, despite his popularity, Mars was not worshipped in the same way as some of the other Roman gods. He didn't have any major temples or festivals dedicated to him, and he wasn't associated with any particular cults or mysteries. Instead, he was seen as a more distant and mysterious god, and his worship was mostly confined to the military and the upper classes. The soldiers saw him as their protector in battle, and the elites saw him as the god who had given them their power and wealth. In fact, the Romans created their own myths about Mars to fit their beliefs and values. For example, the story of Romulus and Remus, which I mentioned earlier, was seen as a way of showing that the Roman emperors were descended from gods and therefore had a divine right to rule. This story was also used to emphasize the importance of loyalty and duty, as well as the value of courage and strength. Of course, Mars wasn't the only god of war in the Roman pantheon. There was also Bellona, who was the goddess of war and bloodshed. But Mars was seen as the one who led the armies into battle and gave them the strength to win. As for Ares, the Greek god of war, he remained relatively unknown in Rome. Sure, the Romans knew about him, but they didn't really have any temples or shrines dedicated to him, and he wasn't mentioned in any of the major Roman myths or legends. Instead, he was seen as a foreign god who didn't really belong in the Roman pantheon. But the influence of Mars went beyond religion. He was also seen as the personification of the Roman state itself, and this is reflected in the many military symbols that were associated with him, such as the spear and the shield. These symbols were used to represent the strength and power of the Roman military, and they were also used to intimidate and scare the enemies of Rome. In fact, Mars was so closely associated with the Roman state that he was even seen as its patron spirit. This meant that he was responsible for protecting and guiding the Roman people, and he was seen as the embodiment of the Roman ideal of civic duty and public service. And that's why Mars remains an important figure in Roman history and culture. Even today, we can see his influence in the names of places and organizations, as well as in the symbols and monuments that were built in his honor. And although he may not be worshipped in the same way as he was in the past, his legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of the Roman people. So let me ask you this: what do you think of Mars? Do you think he was a good representation of the Roman ideal of the warrior statesman? Or do you think he was too violent and warlike? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more mythology stories. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Now, if you want to keep learning about ancient history and mythology, check out our podcast, where we discuss all things mythology and ancient history. New episodes are released every Wednesday, and you can listen on various platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye.